Well, I'm not really here to address you. I'm here to introduce my good friend, Dr. Alon Ben-Meir. Alon, when you want to come down. And Alon has been very supportive of the dialogue. This is his second participation with us. Some of you may have read his columns. Those of you who have not, on his blog, which is alonbenmeir.com, please go ahead and enjoy reading and subscribe to it. It's full of good information and commentary on current events involving the Middle East as well as the United States' relation to all the countries of the region. Professor Ben-Meir is a distinguished professor at NYU, and he also had a center right there on world affairs. So I don't want to take much of his valuable time to discuss the issue today. It's somewhat broad, but in light of the developments in Syria, I should add sad development in Syria, he will also touch on that primarily, and then on the Arab Spring in general. Please join me in welcoming our good friend, Alon Ben-Meir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mohammed. I'm looking at the program today, and I see crisis of the Middle East. And actually, when Mohammed asked me to speak this afternoon, I said, "What do you want me to talk about?" He said, "Anything you want to." I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Actually, this morning I prepared a couple of notes. It's in my pocket, but I have no intention of using it, because after looking at the program, I realized I have to talk about something else." What I'd like to do is, given the 25 minutes or so that I have for me, is to touch on three particular crises and hopefully be able to provide you with a different dimension. You know, I've been roaming around this morning listening to the various speakers, wonderful speakers, and I congratulate all of you. But let me touch first on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, then I want to move on the Iran crisis or situation, and then with Syria. You know, everything has been said this morning, specifically about an hour ago, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's actually true. It's correct. There's no question about it. But for those of us who are puzzled as to why, after these many years, and having pretty much concluded that the two-state solution is the only solution, and for many, many reasons, why is then there is no agreement? And I want to mention to you a couple of facts. For example, if you go to the 2000 negotiations between Ehud Barak, the then prime minister, and Arafat, they pretty much agreed nearly on 90% of the issues, of the conflicting issues between them. If you review carefully the notes from the negotiations between Olmert and Mahmoud Abbas in 2008 and 2009, you will also find that nearly 93% of the issues been resolved. So what happened? Why is it there is an agreement after all of these discussions, after all these negotiations that have been painstaking, and have much of it has been done with the sincerity, with an honest effort to try to reach an agreement? And one thing that has been missing, and I've decided just recently to put this in a small book called, the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, Imperatives and Choices. And that is because neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians accept certain imperatives that are not subject to change short of a catastrophe. And let me mention this, when you look at what's happening here, there's a mindset. We deal with lands, we deal with politics, we deal with religious implications, but there's something that most observers of the region really do not touch upon, that is the psychological dimension of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and how that psychological dimension impact every conflicting issue between the two sides. And in that regard, then you have to discern what is the imperative that each party must recognize, and what are the choices, therefore, they must make. And very, very briefly, the Palestinian will have to accept the fact of life that there will be no Palestinian return. That is, the right of return can be exercised only symbolically. These are the imperatives. Otherwise, Israel will not remain a Jewish state under any circumstances. And no Israeli prime minister, even the most liberal one, will accept that. Israel will have to accept the imperative that Jerusalem will have to be a capital of a two-state, a Palestinian state and an Israeli state. This is an imperative. Even if the Palestinians were to agree, the Arab world, the Muslim world, will never relinquish the right of the Palestinian to have a capital in Jerusalem. The Palestinian must accept the fact that however Israel may exaggerate its national security concern, the Israelis, from a mindset in terms of psychology, they have a deep-seated concern over their national security. And these national security will have to be met. The Palestinians need to demonstrate a capacity to understand the Israeli mindset when it comes to national security, because the Israelis have experienced the horror of the World War II, and many of them still believe even today that it can happen again, however remote that possibility may be. Israel will have to accept the fact of life that the Palestinian state has to be a viable state. It has to have clear borders. Israel will have to return perhaps 95, 97, 96% of the West Bank to the Palestinians. But that doesn't mean that Israel cannot retain, for example, the string of settlement along the 1967 border, where 70% of the Israeli settlers actually reside today. Which means, although there are 300,000 Israelis living in the West Bank, no more than 50,000 need to be relocated. And as a matter of fact, now we are also talking about the possibility that some settlement like Ariel, with 50,000 Israelis, may stay exactly where it is in the Palestinian territory as long as they adhere to Palestinian rules. And why not? That is the other imperative that both sides must accept, that coexistence, that the interconnectedness between the two sides, it's a fact on the ground that is not subject to change. For example, take Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the city that has the largest occupant of Israelis and Palestinians. Nearly 450,000 Israelis and 250,000 Palestinians. How you are going to resolve this issue? That is, they are going to be there. They will continue to coexist there under any and all circumstances, no matter how the political solution is going to look like. Which means Jerusalem will remain united. There will be no walls, and there will be no borders. But a Palestinian is a Palestinian with a Palestinian nationality, and Israeli is an Israeli with an Israeli nationality. And there will be differences in terms of nationality versus permanent residency. So the solutions are there. But what the impediments, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, is how do you bring the parties to understand the psychological impediments that has prevented them from actually accepting the imperatives on the ground? That is the problem today. It is really not as much as who gets what, but it is a change of mindset. And what we have been witnessing, and that is really the tragic, actually, aspect of it, is the public narratives. Israeli and Palestinian public narrative. The Israelis continue to talk about, as Netanyahu does, this is a homeland. He calls it Judea and Samaria. This is the biblical land of the state of Israel. And many Israelis started to believe this is the case, maybe. The Palestinians keep talking about the right of return and the right of return. So the public narratives is as such that has created a mindset embedded in precepts that are not lend themselves to a solution. Which means if we really want to begin, we want to fashion a solution, both sides will have to begin to change the public narratives about these conflicting issues, where the resolution, in fact, it's on the table already, it exists. But the public would need to begin to understand it. Let me move, if we have any moment or two, I'd be delighted to answer some of your questions. Talking about the Arab Spring, when I began to look into what happened in Tunisia and subsequently in Egypt, and I discussed this with many of my friends, I said, this is the beginning. It's maybe called the Arab Spring, but in fact it's going to be a long and cruel winter. And I will suggest to you today that what we are witnessing in Tunisia, in Libya, in Egypt, in Syria, and elsewhere, this is only the beginning of a process. And I'm prepared to venture and say to you, it will take no less than a generation before we see a semblance of real stability throughout that region. So make no illusion about why there is no stability in Egypt after 1 year of a revolution, why the Libyans are going through the pain that they are going through today. This is the very beginning of a very long and cruel process. And we know, we tend to forget here in the West that how many generations it took the United States or the European community to reach the point where we are today. Our democratic system of government was not invented overnight or over 1 year. It took us generations to develop to the way we are today. And for some reason, we expect the Arab world to change overnight and adopt a system that are basically it's totally alien to them. And we have to keep that in mind. Hence, you can understand why is it we are seeing what we are seeing in Syria today or in Egypt today. And whereas there are some comparison that can be made between the various Arab countries, they are not one and the same. And that's another mistake we tend to make. And whereas the political system we would like them to see, the majority of them would like to see, which is a democratic form of government, it's a goal. It should be seen as a goal, but not something that can be instituted quickly. And what you see happen, because the Western pressure, go for democratic form of government, go for an election, well, the results were quite obvious to all of us, and that is various Muslim groups are going to win these elections because they have been organized for so long. There was no surprise to us to see Ennahda winning in Tunisia, no surprise for the Muslim Brotherhood to win in Egypt, and no surprise for any Muslim groups to be winning in future elections, even one to take, for example, in Syria. And that is, we, with our eagerness to see this kind of progress, as a matter of fact, we've been misleading these people and giving them the wrong advice. I've been saying time and again, you need to have established transitional government for 2 or 3 or 4 years, allow the secular parties to develop the kind of platform they need to develop, get the public to become aware of these platforms, so when they go finally to vote, they will vote for something they understand, they can relate to, and that is not the case. And the second element I just want to mention about that, no matter what kind of political processes and development take place throughout the Arab world, unless it is accompanied by significant, fundamental economic development program, sustainable development program, it will not work. Today, after the revolution in Egypt, the youth in the streets are not burning Israeli flags or American flags, are not screaming they want something else. They want education. They want jobs. They want opportunity. That's what they want. They're not looking for just the vote. They want food and freedom. They do not want one without the other. And that is fundamental for us to here in the West to understand, and for them as well to understand. It goes together. And then the focus will have to be on sustainable development project that will involve millions of people eventually at a much lower cost and with the least advanced technology. And that's how you're going to create a job. From the bottom up, that is the progress and the wealth will be generated from the bottom up rather than the top to bottom. Finally, let me touch upon the situation in Syria, which is tragic to say the least, but it is somehow very much connected also to what's going on with Iran and the conflict with Iran about its nuclear program. You know, I think we are at a critical crossroad today. There is an incredible opportunity to try to save the Syrian people, while at the same time perhaps succeeding in isolating Iran. There should be no doubt in anybody's mind here that Iran has the ambition to become a regional hegemon. equipped with the nuclear weapons. And I'm not telling you this because it just happened to be in the news. We have spent a great deal of time and talking to people who in the know. There is absolutely no doubt about in any way this mind that to know the reality in Iran, that Iran is on the verge of acquiring at a minimum the technology to produce a nuclear weapon, if not producing the weapon itself. Israel has established certain red lines. Israel has conveyed to the United States certain three things and suggested the following. We will not act as long as Iran did not reach the threshold, that is the point of no return, or that the United States sanction is actually working. If it is actually, it's crippling, and we see that Iran is actually suffering from a crippling sanction, there is no need to act, then we will not be acting. And or that the United States, the government of the United States, have made a decision in principle to take military action should it become necessary if Iran actually reach that point of no return. But lately another element was added on the part of the Israeli government, and that is the Iranian decision, fearing an Israeli or an American attack. They decided to relocate most of their sensitive technologies, the centrifuge, the one that spin the fastest, that they create 20% grade of uranium, into an area, this is the new facilities near Qum, and basically bury it about 200 feet underground, which will make it impossible for either Israeli or even American bombs to reach. Just recently, Ehud Barak made it very clear, and in fact conveyed this to the United States, that it is no longer for us an issue whether or not they can reach a point of no return, but if they succeed in burying these facilities so deep, where they can reach what we call a zone of immunity, then we have no choice but to take certain action. How does that might relate, at least indirectly, to the situation in Syria? What we are saying today, the Arab League initiative in Syria suggesting first initially sending monitors, well, you know what happened with the monitors. While the monitors were there for 3 to 4 weeks, more than 600 Syrians were killed. So the Arab League, in its wisdom, decided to withdraw the monitors. Then they met again, and they decided, let's send international peacekeeping force. Well, international peacekeeping force can go there if there is peace to be kept. There is no peace to be kept. Moreover, there was no consensus where this force is going to come from. But one thing that the Arab states themselves do not understand, that it is not only the problem of Bashar al-Assad. It is the regime itself. Bashar al-Assad did not inherit the presidency. He inherited a whole apparatus. Even if he wants to make, and I mind you, I have been very directly involved going back 10, 12, 13 years with the Israeli-Syrian affairs, indirectly and indirectly. And I can tell you from very reliable sources, when he came to power, he actually wanted to institute some serious reforms. But he was prevented. He was prevented by the entourage around him, the elite of the Ba'ath Party, the top brass of the military, the internal security, and the mukhabarat, the intelligence. They prevented him because they said, the moment you start to give in here and there, where do we stop? So the question is not whether you send peacekeepers or you send monitors or whatever they be discussing today. That regime, what it has done now, nearly a year later, it is too late for Bashar al-Assad to be saved. It is too late for that regime to stay in power, and something will have to be changed. And in my most recent piece, I suggested very strongly that one strong player that needs to be part of this, and I'm delighted that Turkey is in Tunisia today discussing some of these elements, and that Turkey has a unique interest in making sure that, that its long border with Syria is as such that it can in fact ensure its own security, because it is clear that there will be thousands, if not tens of thousands of refugees, and already there are at least 10,000 refugees across the border to Syria. But what Turkey is going to need to do is basically carve a piece of Syrian territory to be able to provide food, medicine, not only to the refugees, but to those all defecting from the military, from the Syrian military. And now be able to also provide them with arms, as Secretary of State Clinton just this morning intimated. Because the truth of the matter, I don't believe that this President Assad and his government are going to relinquish power unless they are totally, completely forced out, and it's going to have probably to be by force. Turkey can play, in my view, a very significant role in this regard. The Turks are hesitating because it's a major undertaking, but of course with the support of the Arab League, which are ready to lend the Turkey the support it needs, and with the direct and indirect support of the United States and the EU, Turkey may be able to change the balance in Turkey. That is the idea here with which I would not conclude. From the Iran perspective, from day one, Iran's ambition has become not just to become a regional hegemon, but to maintain a crescent from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean with a majority of Shiite. Iran is overwhelmingly Shiite. Iraq is about 60% Shiite. The government in Syria, the Alawat, is an offshoot of a Shiite, and Lebanon has a strong, some 45% of Shiite, and pretty much under the control of Hezbollah. For Iran to maintain that crescent is critically important. The linchpin to that crescent is Syria. Remove Syria from Iran's belly, and you will change the entire geopolitical equation throughout the Middle East. I honestly believe that the United States and the West today and the Arab League, who are very keen and interested to make sure that Iran does not become the dominant power in the Middle East, specifically the Saudis and others, which is the majority of the Arabs are Sunni, as you well know. This is an historic opportunity that the Arab world, the Sunni Arab world, the United States, the EU and others, specifically Turkey as well, to try to seize this moment. If you remove Syria from Iran's belly, you break that crescent. And this may very well also impact on Iran's determination to try to obtain a nuclear weapon. The last part of it is not certain by any means. This, in fact, removing Syria from Iran's belly could give different kind of incentive to Tehran. But the truth of the matter is not just Syria will be out of that equation. With that also goes Lebanon. Because without Syria, Hezbollah will not be able to receive the kind of logistical, political, and financial support they've been getting for the last 3 decades. So these are the 3 crises. And somehow, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not necessarily directly connected to it, but a resolution to one will certainly help the other. I want to conclude by suggesting the following, because I'm always being asked, what is the prospect of attack against Iran by either the United States and Israel? Well, if you talk to the Israelis, and they know will tell you, President Obama missed the mark with his slow effort to try to impose the so-called crippling sanctions. Why wait until now to target this Iranian central bank? Why wait until now to target SWIFT, where all the financial transactions take place? From their perspective, the sanction will no longer work, which is one of the red lines. That is from the Israeli perspective. The second one, they do not see, based on the narrative we hear, the Israelis hear from Washington, that this country in this year, in an election year, is prepared to actually take a military action against Iran. The third one is that Iran is working very fast toward moving its main significant facilities and bury it as deep as they possibly can. And from the Israeli perspective, this could be achieved within 3 to 4 months from now. Which basically leads us to believe the likelihood, and I just say likelihood, that an Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear facilities becomes more likely today than it was a month ago. And if that's going to happen, in my view, it will happen within the next 4 to 5 months. We hope it won't happen, and one way we can prevent that from happening is by doing something also about Syria today. And that is why I feel very strongly. This meeting in Tunisia today will come to recognize that they have a golden historic opportunity to do something about Syria and perhaps prevent a regional conflagration as a result of that. Thank you very much.
As always, thank you so much, Alon, for these very nice remarks. I'm sure there are some who agree and some who disagree. I feel sorry for any president sitting in the White House. We always have a saying about academicians. You get 2 academicians debating a subject, you get 3 opinions. You get 10 policymakers, you're going to get 20 opinions. So, I mean, the situation is really very convoluted at the present time. And I would just start by the question to Alon, and that is, there's now news about the fact if Iran continues and manages to really do its thing, then there will be a nuclear arms race in the Gulf region. We already know the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and few other countries are contracting with South Korea to build nuclear plants for energy, so to speak. So my question is, what will be the attitude of the world, the United States, toward other countries in the region taking precautionary action against Iran by engaging in nuclear facilities?
You know, in speaking to some Israelis on this particular point, and from their perspective, is they created sort of an equation, which is worse. An attack on Iran nuclear facilities now, or allowing Iran to acquire nuclear weapons and then deal with the consequences of that in terms of proliferation throughout the Middle East, and the potential, at least the potential of Iran actually threatening Israel existentially, as it has repeatedly have said in the past. So this is the dilemma today, and that is why from the Israelis' perspective, and we have seen actually, I don't know if you heard about it or seen some of it, there was an extensive Israeli intelligence review about the potential reaction of Iran to an attack. And as recently as Barak, what he could say publicly, he said, to calm the Israelis, he said, don't concern yourself. We're not going to suffer 10,000 casualties or 5,000 casualties or even 500 casualties, because our assessment of potential Iranian potential counterattacks is as such that is not going to deter us from taking action should we deem it necessary in the end. So the dilemma today is the two: to allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon and then bear and suffer and continue to fear possible consequences of that, and plus the proliferation by other nations who would like to who would want to protect themselves against Iranian threat. So the one thing that we have to I'm going to emphasize, whereas the Arab state publicly never talk about it, but privately I've been told by top officials in various countries, they would love to see Israel attacking Iran nuclear facilities. From their perspective, this is the best outcome. That's what they want to see, albeit publicly they'll condemn it and they will do all kinds of things, but privately they want to see that happen. Specifically the Saudis, who are terrified of the prospect of Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon, and we saw it as a continue to push toward a hegemony of sort, and who's going to challenge it under those circumstances.
Panel at 2 o'clock, so I hope to see you all there. I think your assessment of the eagerness to sort of build democracy right away is spot on. I was wondering if you could target for us which institutions are responsible for perpetuating. Is it the media? Is it the governments? Is it international institutions? Where is that coming from?
I think it's at least we cite 2 sources. One is the pressure from the West, specifically the United States and West European communities. This is really, it's been a major factor. And the second thing of the very quite limited, some think tanks and civil societies within the countries involved have had it with these type of regime, and they want to change. They want it as fast as possible, and that's the problem. And they really should sit back and think for a moment. Should we just have a transitional government for 3, 4, 5 years first? Adhere to basic human rights to start with, and allow secular parties to form, develop their own platform, their own political agenda, and be able to share it with the public so that the public will know exactly where they stand. And that is not happening. And then, as I said earlier, the results are quite clear to us. This is what's happened in the various countries where they had an election already. And do we know how, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood eventually will evolve? I mean, we are looking at the Turkish example in Turkey, and I personally have some doubts as to whether that is necessarily a perfect example, because what we are watching also and seeing is the continuing pervasiveness of the AK party. And there are problems. Journalists are putting in jail with no trial for years. People are afraid to talk openly. Then we can sit at a table and having discussion, and they'll tell me, Alon, we shouldn't be talking about something like this because somebody might be listening. So is Turkey can really provide the kind of model we're talking about? So we have a problem with that. So that is why it is so critical to allow, when you have an opportunity at least, secular party to grow in an atmosphere, at least relative freedom, because this opportunity may be lost in 2 or 3 years down the line.
I think the points you made about what Israelis and Palestinians have to come to terms with psychologically is dead on. My concern is, given the ideological and geographical divide among the Palestinians and the direction the Israeli government is going in, I'm wondering when that could actually happen, where the leaders, at least on both sides, will be able to reach those kinds of decisions. And I'd like to, maybe if you could just spend a little bit of time on the internal Israeli politics and Palestinian. What do you think is the likelihood of them actually coming to terms with these issues that you identified?
There is absolutely no doubt, and should be no question, that Israel and Hamas will have to come to terms, will start talking to one another. Israel will not be able to make peace with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and pretend as if there is no Hamas and there is no Gaza. That is not going to happen. Such a peace is not sustainable, period. But if you watch what Hamas has been doing in the last 3 years since the Israeli incursion in 2008 and 2009, for all intent and purposes, they have abandoned the use of force as a means by which to reach their political objective. If you watch what happened in Syria and how that impact on Hamas operation, it's very serious. Khalid Mashal is no longer there. The Palestinians did not want to associate themselves with what's happening in Syria. He left Syria, and when he went and he made the deal with Mahmoud Abbas, it was very clear, and I can tell you this first source. King Abdullah of Jordan made it abundantly clear to Khalid Mashal, if you want to be part of the process, use of force, threatening Israel, using violence as a means by which to reach your goal, it's entirely out of the question, because we are not going to be involved in that. We do not want to have a war with Israel under any circumstances. So there's a clear understanding between Khalid Mashal and King Abdullah as far as that goes, and Mahmoud Abbas. The person that has not been persuaded so far is Ismail Haniyeh. And he needs to come on board just the same. And he knows the situation right now that, albeit voluntarily, Ismail Haniyeh adhere to the ceasefire for all intent and purposes, they still want to maintain militant resistance as a mean by as an added measure to force the Israelis' hand. But the Hamas is coming to the conclusion that force is no longer viable, and they're going to have to change course. What happened in Syria has aided that process greatly. The other point that you mentioned related to the Israeli side, there's no doubt. Interestingly enough, there's there's an interesting phenomenon. If you take polls in Israel, and we've been taking the polls, every few months there are polls in Israel. How many Israelis will support a two-state solution that would require the return of 95% of the West Bank? There's an overwhelming majority between 65 and 75. That's the range. Every single poll suggested that. But then you have a government which is by and large sitting on the right of center. This is a problem right now in Israel, because what happened is, for all intent and purposes, the Labour Party has abdicated. I mean, from my perspective, Ehud Barak, what he's done, he betrayed the party, he betrayed his country, and he betrayed the trust that the Israelis bestowed on him. So there's no Labour Party. Kadima has no leadership. And what is missing today in Israel is leadership, and that is really the problem. There are no brilliant, courageous, visionary leaders who will say, enough is enough. Where is the Ben-Gurion and the Begins, or even the Sharon? You need a person like this with courage, with vision, who say, this is the reality, and we have to accept this reality because it's not subject to change in a very dramatic way. Am I hopeful there'll be such a leader will rise? We have to be hopeful because I don't believe that the Israelis would want to continue to live another 60 years under these conditions.
Thank you, Alon.
My pleasure. Thank you.